So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Randy. We're just gonna wait for maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, just to let a couple more people join in. All right, so I think we're gonna start now. Again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making your time. My name is Randy. I'm the account manager here in Austin Network, based in Victoria. Today, I have Brian from MODEX here with us. Brian will be the one that's running most of these programs. Now, just gonna quickly share the agenda with you. So we are the focus of this is really for Brian to give you a demo on how he provisioned Teams direct routing, and share some tips and tricks and best practices. We also have a few exciting initiatives that we are collaborating with Brian to provide to you guys, which I'll share a bit more later on. And after that, I'm pretty sure we'll have enough time for Q&A if you all have any questions for Brian or for myself and the hosted network team. So now I guess, Brian, over to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and
excellent. Thanks, Randy. All right, let me take over the screen share. Welcome, everyone. Today's a technical session. So at the very least, you're going to need some basic PowerShell skills and also access to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center to configure this. And I'm going to assume that most of you guys are relatively new to this Teams direct routing and the Teams phone system features. So we're going to spend a lot of time going into a lot of those features that Teams offers. And what you might find is actually quite surprising is that the Teams phone system is actually one of the best on the market today in terms of a VoIP service. There's a lot of flexibility, a lot of configurations that you can do in Teams that you may not have thought was possible before. And so we're going to spend a lot of the time is going to be around, it's going to be an end-to-end session, right? So we're going to be doing right from the start when you're ordering this service, what happens, how do you configure the SIP trunks, and then we're going to go into the Teams Admin Center. We're going to start, provisioning users. We're going to look at auto attendants, setting up call queues, and so on. And so hopefully by the end of this session, you're going to know how to configure this end-to-end for any new customer that comes on board with you for Teams direct routing. All right, so to start off with, Hosted Network actually provides a lot of good material around setting up the initial direct routing. And particularly the first step that you'll have is when you order this service, you're going to be provisioned a number of SIP trunks. And so these SIP trunks will need to be registered with the Microsoft 365 tenant, and Hosted Network provides you with these instructions here, which you get as part of the provisioning email. And you can just basically follow this guide here. And we're going to skip over this pretty quickly because it's quite simple, even though it is PowerShell. All the commands have been provided for you here, and it's as easy as copy, replace a couple of things here and there. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the configuration guide. Okay, and in the configuration guide, the first thing you're going to need to do is set up your PowerShell to connect with Microsoft Teams. Okay, so they cover this in these instructions as well. So getting PowerShell to the Microsoft Teams. So there's actually a new plugin for PowerShell to install the Teams connector. And so if you just Google that, you'll find that pretty quickly. It's basically install, the module Microsoft Teams. All right, so once you've done that, basically we've got a couple of things here around adding the domain to our tenant. And so that's how these SIP trunks are provisioned. They're basically a separate domain that hosted network provides us that we then have to register with our Microsoft 365 tenant. Okay, so scrolling down here, domain configuration, you can see, so hosted net will provide you with that domain, and then you go into your Microsoft 365 admin center, into settings, into your domains, and you're going to add that domain in here. And so for this tenant, I'm using a demo tenant today. You can see we've already done that step here. So modexdemo.teams.mhn.cloud, that's our SIP trunk. That's the domain that we need to register in our Microsoft 365 tenant. And so you basically do that just by adding the domain. You go add a domain. You'll just then follow the steps to type the domain in. It'll give you a TXT DNS record to validate that domain. You provide that TXT DNS record to hosted network, the provisioning team. They will then add it and then allow you to then validate that domain in the tenant. Once it's validated, you'll see it'll have this healthy status. Okay, and you'll see if we're going to the DNS record, down here, we've got we don't actually use any of these, so we don't need to bother with any of these other records. Okay, so that is basically the steps that I'm talking about here, 1 to 7, adding the unique domain. Once that domain's been added and it's been verified and you can see that it's healthy, then we need to create a user, our first user that sort of just activates that domain and the SIP trunk. Okay, and so you can see the instructions here. We basically create a new user, but in this instance, when we go to create that user, we actually need to assign it to that new domain. So that the username email address is for that new domain that we've registered. Okay, so if we have a look here, I've got some examples that have been created already. The MODEX admin user, for example, you'll see the domain that I've used here in the username is that domain that hosted network have provided us. So we just need to create that just to provision this, and it can take a few hours. So you can see the advice here is actually just to keep that activated for up to 24 hours, and also it can take anywhere up to 30 minutes to 2 hours to 3 hours to actually provision. So you kind of need to do that a bit ahead of time. And the good news is, with this direct routing deployment, usually the customer will want to bring across their existing numbers. And so you've got that porting period where you need to bring their old numbers across to kind of do some of this back-end configuration first. And that's where I'd recommend sort of starting this off. Okay, and so the next thing we look at is phase 2. Okay, so enable the direct trunking and user access. And this is where that command is, to install the Microsoft Teams module into PowerShell if you haven't got it already. Okay, so basically you just need to open up a PowerShell window. I usually use this PowerShell IC because it has this scripting pane. And you can basically, as long as you run it as admin, it will allow you then to install that module into your PowerShell session. Okay, so you can basically just copy these commands. So that would just be, basically copy that, install the module if I don't have it already. And then, in the PowerShell screen, we would just paste that and hit enter, and that's going to install the Microsoft Teams module. The next step down is then connecting to the Microsoft Teams tenant. And so you can send, we've got these next 2 commands, import module and connect to Microsoft Teams. We can basically just copy these. And what I've done here, I've just copied all of these commands into this scripting pane, just so that we can quickly kind of go over them. So at the top here, we've got that import module and then connect to Microsoft Teams. Once you've connected, so basically it's going to ask you for the credentials. So you need to be a global admin or a Teams admin to actually connect to this in the back end. So you would just punch those credentials in, use your multi-factor authentication if you've got that set up. And then the next step, once you've connected, is to run these set of commands. And you can run them one by one, or if you're familiar with this scripting pane, you can run them all together. So basically, if we go back quickly to that article, you can see here, hosted network have provided that for us, nice and easy. And there's some instructions here. So what you need to do is replace the domain in the text of those commands with the unique domain that hosted network gave us that we added in phase 1. Okay, so nice and easy. We just look at that and you'll see if the domain is actually in this part here. All right, so when you get it, it's going to look like this. It'll just be domain in like little brackets. All right, so you just replace that with the domain that hosted network have provided, and we just do that in every line of that text. Okay, so if we quick switch back to this again, if I scroll across, you'll see there's that domain that's just been added here, and it's in each line of this scripting pane. Sorry. Okay, so we just need to replace that, and then replace that, and replace that. Okay, so each line we just replace it with our domain, and then we can just highlight this section, hit run, and then that's going to add these voice routes to our tenant. All right, and then so then the next part down here is enabling user access. Okay, so there's two parts to enabling a user for direct routing. The first part is licensing the user with the appropriate Microsoft 365 license. If you're using E1 or E3, then you need to add the phone system license. Otherwise, if you're using E5, then that comes with the phone system license. Or if you're using business voice, that comes with the phone system license built into it. So you don't need to add an additional add-on. Otherwise, you would need to license that user from the team's the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You know, you basically just come in here and you can see we've got some of these users already provisioned with them licenses already assigned. If you look at this example, we've got the MODEX admin licenses. You know, we will just make sure that they're licensed with that phone standard license. Okay, so once they're licensed, then we can follow these next steps here, which is assigning a number to that user. Okay, so for direct routing, assigning numbers is done only through PowerShell. Okay, so you can't do it through the Teams Admin Center. It always needs to be done through PowerShell. So you always need to, it's best to kind of save this. So you always need to use this connect to Microsoft Teams command to get into the back end and then run these commands to assign the number. So what I'm looking at here is now this lines down here, 21 and 22, where I've just copied it again from Hosted Networks website, the knowledge base. We just copy that. And that's these two lines here. We basically just need to replace the identity with the email address of the person we want to assign the number to, and then replace the telephone number with the direct number that we want to give that person. And then the next line is just enabling the voice route for that user. So again, we would just replace the email address with the person that we're, the email address of the person that we want to activate for calling. All right, and so because the numbers are all done through PowerShell, I find like the easiest way to manage these numbers is actually through a spreadsheet, believe it or not. So if you just create a spreadsheet with the with all of the numbers that have been assigned to your tenant or to your account, then you can easily just come in here, put the names and email addresses against those numbers, and that'll help you keep a track of which numbers assigned to who. You can see which numbers are assigned to people in the Teams Admin Center as well. But this gives you an overview of every number, I guess, even though you might assign some to an auto attendant or to a call queue, then you can track them all in this one spreadsheet. Whereas in the Teams Admin Center, the call queue numbers and the user numbers are in two different sections. I'll show you what that looks like shortly as well. All right, so basically we run these commands to assign that number to the person, and then that activates them for calling. So you just basically do this for everyone that you need to activate. All right, replace their identity with their email address, replace the phone number with the direct number that you're assigning to them, and then Bob's your uncle, they're activated. And that's pretty much it for this part in PowerShell. There's only one more section, which is basically the assigning of a phone number to a resource account. And I'll come back to this one as I go into the resource accounts in the Teams Admin Center. One thing I just quickly point out though, is that these commands are being deprecated by Microsoft. You can see down here in the PowerShell, in the PowerShell window at the bottom, I've actually executed some of these commands already. And you can see that in orange, there's a bit of a warning there that that command's being deprecated. And so it's being replaced by a new command, which I'm sure, hosted network's going to update the documentation with command as well. So it's going to basically be the same things, just slightly different, where you would have the email address and the phone number as well that you just need to replace in that command. All right, so basically, actually really simple to set up the voice routes and SIP trunks. All right, copy all the commands, replace some things here and there, and then off you go. All right, now we're going to jump into the admin center. All right, and so everything that we're going to look at is predominantly done through the Teams admin center. All right, and that's found right at the bottom. If you go into the Microsoft 365 admin center, at Teams in the admin centers at the bottom on the left there. All right, so when we fire that up, that basically takes us to this window here, the Teams admin center. And there's a couple of areas that we're going to quickly look at. So the manage users, if we have a look here, this is where we can see those users that have been activated with calling and have a number assigned to them. You can see once we've assigned that number to them in PowerShell on the back end, it's then reflected in here. So you'll see MODEX admin's got a number assigned to it, staff members got a number assigned to it. And that's how we can check as well. If you want to just have a look at who's assigned to which number, we can actually check it from here as well. All right, so if we look on the left here, we've got the category here called voice. All right, and so with direct routing, most of these things are done through PowerShell. And so what you can do through these voice menu is really around configuring a couple of policies, right? So we've got these calling policies, caller ID policies. These don't really work with direct routing. You've got to do some of these things through hosted network, especially like caller ID, where if you want to mask a caller ID or something like that, that's what hosted network needs to do for you. But there is a thing here called call park, which you can actually configure through the Teams admin center. Call park is a policy where it allows a person to put a call on hold. Teams then gives them a 2-digit code, which they can then share with anyone within the organization. And then whoever's available to take that call can actually come into their Teams window, type in that code, and retrieve the call themselves. All right, and that if you want to turn that on, that's off by default for some reason. If you want to turn that on, you have to come into this call park policies, and you can just change the global policy to turn that on. As simple as that. All right, so what we're going to look at now down here is if we scroll right down, we can kind of skip over most of these things and look at auto attendant and call queues. So these are the cool features that a lot of people don't really know are available in the Teams phone system service. And first thing we're going to look at is call queues. So call queue is basically like a hunt group. So you're creating a group of people who can answer a mainline phone number or a common phone number. All right, and so I'm going to create these on the fly through this demo account. But before I quickly jump into that, what we need to look at is a thing at the bottom called resource accounts. And before creating a call queue, we actually need to create a resource account. And a resource account is basically a free licensed account that can be assigned to these resources. And the resources are those auto attendants and call queues. All right, and you can see I've created a test one already, the sales call queue. I've also got a mainline auto attendant, which I haven't assigned a number to it. All right, so I'm going to use these today. But basically, if you need to create one, you can just go to add, create it from here. We could call it, support line call queue, perhaps. And then we choose the resource type. It's going to be a call queue. We just hit save. All right, you'll see that's created there. When that's created, it's going to create it as a new user in your Microsoft 365 tenant as well. So if we refresh this now, you'll see now we've got this support line call queue. And that's because we actually need to license this with a free license that Microsoft gives us for this type of account. So if we highlight it, go to licenses and apps, you'll see we've got this Teams phone system standard virtual user license. We need to assign that. If you don't have these added to your tenant, if you're using a distributor, you can ask your distributor to provision these for you. If your customer is buying these direct from Microsoft, then you can basically just look for that in the purchase services section. If I just load that up now, I'll just search for that virtual user. So we're going to purchase it from Microsoft. And we scroll right down, you can see here, it's this free license at the bottom. It says we already own this. It's a free license. We can order as many as you want from Microsoft, and they just add it to your tenant. Okay, so that's something that needs to be activated and assigned to each resource account. All right, so once that's done, then we can see we've got these resource accounts here. We're going to need to assign a number to that resource account. And so for that new one that we've created, support line call queue, let's have a look at it. Because we're using direct routing, we need to use PowerShell to assign that number to it. All right, so what we're going to do here, we're just going to take its email address. I'll go back into here to get his email address. I'm going to grab that email address. And in the configuration guide, this is actually in here, scrolling down to the left here, creating a resource account and assigning a direct routing DID. So these instructions are in the hosted network knowledge base as well. There are some steps in here to create the resource account using PowerShell. So you can follow this to do it via PowerShell if you want to. I find it's a little bit more complicated than just doing it through the portal, which is why I've shown you how to do it through the portal instead. So that would basically be these steps here. Number one, create the resource account. Where we're at now is we've already created it through the portal. We're going to assign the DID to the resource account. So you'd basically just copy the script here, paste it in your PowerShell, and I've already done that down here. So that's these two lines here. All right, so you would basically, again, just replace the email address with the new email of that resource account you just created. Have a look at your spreadsheet, see what number's available. Replace the phone number. And then we're going to replace this one as well, the next line down. Okay, so we've just replaced the email address and we've just replaced the phone number, and we're just going to run that. And then that's going to assign that number to that resource account. So now when we create this support line call queue, it's going to be contactable on that number. All right, and then we're just going to go into our spreadsheet. We're going to update that so that we know that we've assigned that number to that call queue. All right, so if I go back into the Teams Admin Center now and refresh this, it should actually show us that number that we've just assigned to it. All right, and there we go here. So the support line now has that number assigned to it in here. Okay, so now that I've shown you how to manage these resource accounts, and I've got another one for this mainline auto attendant. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and assign a number to that one as well. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to look in our spreadsheet. Okay, this one's not being used. I'll take that number. I'll replace that number in here. And then I'll grab that email address. Place it in here. And then I'm going to run those two commands. All right, So this is going to give us everything we need to do the next step, which is actually start to configure these call queues and the auto attendant. All right, so refresh this again, just to make sure that that's worked. Fantastic. All right, so now we're off. Okay, so the two things we've got here are the auto attendants and call queues. So auto attendant is basically an automated system that can take a call for you and triage the call. So it can redirect the call based on certain business hours. It can put a IVR in front of it so that it says, press 1 for sales, 2 for support, 3 for information, that sort of thing. So usually how these are set up, in my experience, is that an auto attendant is placed in front, for example, like the main office number, and then the call queues are placed behind it. So you would have a sales call queue, a support call queue, and then the auto attendant would say, press 1 for sales. And then that press 1 would then connect it with the sales call queue. Press 2 for support would then connect with the support call queue, and so on. But it's up to you how you want to configure these. You can have them as standalone auto attendants, so you can have them as standalone call queues, so that in this example here, someone can actually dial this number 91677474 and go straight to the sales team's call queue. All right, so I'm going to go into the call queues now, and because I've explained that, so that usually the auto attendant sits in front of the call queue, we're going to then have to configure the call queues first before configuring the auto attendant. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new call queue. Basically, just go new. We can call it something. So we had 2 resource accounts before. We had the sales and we had support. So we're just going to do those. Sales call queue. And then see, we've got that resource account. So we need to add that resource account straight away. Search for that. You can see it there. Click add, and then add. And then you can see now that's associated with this call queue. Down here, we have this option here, but this is for native Teams calling, so it doesn't quite work with direct routing, unfortunately. And then down here, we've got the language. So you can actually search for Australia in a language, and then click next. And you can see here. So this takes kind of a bit of planning to think, how do I want the calls to flow when they hit our business? Do we want to have that mainline auto attendant then triage the call to these call queues? Or are these call queues going to be standalone where people can actually just call the sales team straight away? Because if that's the case, then this is where Microsoft gives you the ability to put a greeting in front of the call queue. So you could, if you have welcome to the sales team or something like that sort of spiel, bit of a sales and marketing spiel, you can actually come in here and upload that to this call queue, and it will play that message for you. And then you can also customize the hold music. So when different to a traditional PBX, where when a call comes into a queue, instead of the caller hearing a ringtone sound, it actually puts them on hold while Teams finds someone to take that call in the hunt group. So it can be a bit jarring if you're using this as the main direct line, that people can contact you on, in terms of, like I said before, people can dial the sales team directly. Then it's best to have a custom hold music. Otherwise, people are going to think, oh, I'm straight away put on hold. What's going on here? So I generally recommend putting a message here to say, we're looking for someone to take your call. Thanks for waiting, and so on. All right, so if you're using this as a standalone, this is what you'll configure. If you're using it with an auto attendant in front of it, usually you would just leave these as blank, and that's fine. All right, so I'm just going to leave these, and I'm going to go next. And you can see now we've got the call answering. So we've got a few different options on adding members to a call queue. The first option is to link the call queue with a team in Teams. And you can see that's the first option here. So with the way this works is actually connects directly to a channel that lives within a team in Teams. And so you need to have that channel created already. And basically from here, you would just search for the team. I think in this demo environment, there's no teams created, unfortunately, so I can't show you what this looks like. But basically, you would just search for the team name, and then it would ask you to search for the channel name underneath that. All right. And the benefit of doing it this way is that then when people are added to the team, they're automatically added to this call queue. You don't have to manage the call queue as a separate group membership. It's all just linked with the team. So if you've got a sales team, when a new sales team member starts, they're just added to the sales team, and then bang, they're added straight into the sales call queue. The other benefit of doing it this way is that the call queue becomes visible in the Teams app. So when you open the Teams app, you'll actually see the call queue as a separate tab in the channel that you've linked it with. So everyone in the team can actually see the call history of the call queue. And they can also see who the members are that have opted into the queue and opted out, because there is an option to give people the option to opt out and opt in of a queue. So perhaps they're going on lunch break, give them the option to opt out of the queue so that they're not receiving those calls. And then when they come back in, they can opt back in. The other two ways of doing this membership is with explicit users. And that's where, if we see here, we add explicitly who we want to be as part of this queue. The downside of this is that it's all manual in the Teams admin center. So, even though a sales team has been created, then someone needs to come in here and add them to the call queue. And obviously they need to be a Teams administrator to do that as well. So you would just search for the people within the organization and add them to this as a list. So I'm just trying to find someone here that we can add MODEX. Oops, sorry, my VM has just decided to shut down for some reason. Keeps doing that for some reason. I think it's doing Windows updates all the time. I'll just start that back up. All right, so where was I? So basically let me just get this back up and running. Basically, when you add people explicitly to a call queue, Teams will give you a list of those users, and you can then prioritize the call flow based on that list of users. So the benefit there is that if you want someone to be receiving that call first all the time, perhaps there's always an admin person that's there to take the calls. And then, if they're not available, you want it to go to the second person and the third person, and we call that serial routing. Then that's the only option you can do, is to explicitly list them in the Teams admin center for the call queue so that you can then prioritize them. When you use the Teams channel and the team to link it, then it doesn't give you that option, unfortunately. It just sort of does it alphabetically. All right, just while I log that back in. All right, we'll go back to the Teams admin center. Okay, so the other option then is to add people by a Microsoft 365 group. And that's very similar to adding them as a team to a call queue. And again, the benefit there would mean that once someone's added to that group, they're automatically added to the call queue. But the downside is then if you want to use that serial routing where you can actually explicitly say the order of calls that they want to come through, like who they go to, that option's not available. So I'm just going to go back in and reset this up. All right, so you will see here. So the next option that I was just mentioning there is add a group. And that's where you can add a distribution list or Microsoft 365 group to manage the membership of this channel, of this call queue. All right, so I just want to show you what that looks like with the adding the explicit users. So if you just add MODEX admin, what's another one I can add? Staff member. All right, see, as we add these individually, you can see we've got this list and these options to move up, move down. And so that would basically change the order of the call coming in to this call queue. So it would go to MODEX admin first, and then it would go to the staff member second. All right, so this option down here, conference mode on, it's best practices to turn this on because it's just about the way that Teams connects the call when it comes in terms of who answers it first. Because there are other options to ring everyone at the same time, which I'll show you what that looks like now. Okay, so let's say we did set it up like that, where we added 2 people as part of the call queue. Then we've got these routing methods. Okay, so attendant routing, that's basically what I was mentioning there. So where the call will come in and ring all of the people at the same time. And then whoever picks up that call first gets the call. The next option is serial routing, where I was saying if you want to put the calls in a specific order to call one by one, this is serial routing. And so if we chose that, then because we put the users explicitly in the previous step as MODEX admin first and then staff member second, then it's going to call MODEX admin first. And you can see down here, we've got this call agent alert time, 30 seconds. It's going to call him for 30 seconds before then moving to the next person. And it will keep going for 30 seconds to the next person until someone picks up the call. All right. The other options, we've got round robin, which is basically tries to distribute the calls evenly amongst all of the call queue members. And then the last one is longest idle. So whoever hasn't had the call for the longest, it'll give them the call first. And then you can see, so presence-based routing is an option where we can link the call queue with the status of our users. So if they're regularly using their status to kind of be, free, busy, away, that sort of thing, then this is an option to automate the opting in and out of a call queue. So basically, if they're not available, then it automatically opts them out of the queue. So Teams will see that they're busy or that they're away from their desk, and it won't route the calls to them. The other option down here is the manual opt-out, right? So you give them the ability to toggle in and out of those queues. And this will give people the ability then to go into their Teams settings, see the call queues that they're a part of, and toggle in and out of the queues as they need. All right, so now I'm going to go next. So now we've got a couple of other options. We've got the call overflow handling. So what's the maximum number of calls that can bank in the queue and stay on hold before we do something with those calls? The default's 50, which is a lot of calls. Usually you would just maybe do 5 unless you're running a big call center. And then you can say when there's 5 calls banked up, the 6th call, we want to redirect it and usually we would redirect it to a voicemail. And so to set up a voicemail, you basically just, as you can see here, you can just create an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 group, and then you can use that group as the group voicemail for the call queue. So this is the best way to do it, because that way when someone leaves a message, then that voicemail gets emailed to everyone in that group, and then everyone gets a copy of that voicemail. And you can see here, so we've got this, when we redirect that call to voicemail, we can actually upload a custom audio message. So we can say, sorry, all our agents were busy today, but please leave a message and we'll get back to you ASAP. We can upload that file here, or we can add a text to voice greeting message here as well. All right, so if we have that configured, then the last thing we've got is the call timeout handling. And this is basically the maximum wait time that someone stays on hold. And you can choose, up to, I hit submit by accident. So if I go back to that, we can choose up to 45 minutes that people can wait on hold. For some businesses, that might be too long again. So we might go to 5 minutes. And so after 5 minutes, what happens? The call times out, and perhaps again, we would redirect it to voicemail. And you would set that up exactly the same as what we did before to that Microsoft 365 group, and then upload or type in your custom greeting message for that voicemail. All right, so that's basically the call queue, which is a hunt group. All right, so that's already saved. Sales call queue. All right, and from here you can see we've got the resource account assigned. We've got the number of agents that have been assigned to this call queue. We've got a maximum number of calls and the maximum wait time. Now we go to the auto attendant. And we create an auto attendant. All right, you can see I've already started creating this, but you basically just go to add, and then it will take you to this screen where you would then fill out what you want to call it. Let's call it the mainline auto attendant. We set the time zone. Time zone is important because this is what will help us with that time of day routing, so that when the call comes in outside of business hours, we can do something else with the call instead. Down here, we set the language to Australia, and then we've got an option here to enable voice inputs. This is pretty cool because it allows people to actually say a word rather than press a number on the keypad. And so if you turn that on, then when you go next, it takes you to this call flow menu where we can play a greeting message or upload a custom audio file if you've got one. So think of this, if this is your mainline auto attendant, then this is the first thing that people are going to hear when they call your business. So you want to have that custom audio file ready to upload. You can see it's quite flexible here. MP3 WAV, MWMAs, less than 5 megabytes is supported. So just come in here and you upload that. And then you can see down, the next thing is to then route the call. So the call can be redirected straight away to someone if you want to, or a call queue, or you have these IVR options, so play menu options. And in here, if we choose that, you can see there are 2 ways we can do this. We can have that text to voice greeting message, and we have that play custom audio file where we can upload our own IVR message, pre-recorded message to this instead. All right, I've used the text greeting message just because it's easier for you to see kind of what perhaps you might want to say in that pre-recorded message. All right. And so back in that previous step, where we could enable the voice inputs, you can see here, when we go to these dial keys, there are these voice commands. All right. So basically this option here, set menu options, allows us to add these dial keys. So, press 1, 2, 3, and so on. And then it has a voice command. So we can actually type a word in here that teams will then look out for to associate with that choice. Obviously, then we need to update our message to people to tell them that they can actually do that. And that's why I've done it this way, to to have the text here. So please choose from the following options so we can direct your call. Press 1 or say sales for sales. Press 2 or say support for support. And you can see down here, I've added sales and support as those voice commands for 1 and 2 respectively. And then we've got then the redirect to. So for sales, redirect to, this is actually just redirecting to a specific person. But because we already set up that sales call queue, we can go in here and look, we've got heaps of options of how we can redirect the call. We can redirect it to a person specifically. We can redirect to a voicemail, even to an external number. We can redirect it to an external number here. All right, so now in this scenario, we would choose voice app, look for sales, and that should bring up the sales call queue that we just created. There it is. We've come back in and re-input that voice command. All right, and then we would do the same thing for support. So I didn't create a support call queue. So for this scenario, staff members just going to receive all of those calls. And so basically, you would just fill this out one by one until you've had, you've filled out however many choices you want the caller to make. And then down here, we've got another option to turn on this thing called directory search. All right, so by default, it's on none. But what you can actually do is Teams can be like a virtual receptionist for you. So the auto attendant can search the organization directory to connect people directly with a person. All right, and so for this, there's directory search dial by name. And so basically people will then be able to type in the name, sort of the letters on the keypad as to who they want to connect with. All right, so if it was if it was Brian, then it would be, looking at the keypad, it'll be 27926, and basically Teams will then kind of search through the organization and narrow down that search until the person is happy with the choice that Teams has made for them. And this is pretty useful for like a virtual receptionist. But obviously, again, you're going to need to update your greeting message to tell people that they can do that. So you would say, or type in the name of the person you'd like to speak to, something like that. You would give them the instruction to do that, and then they could type in by name the person that they want to speak to. Once we've done that, we just go next. It's not letting us save these. Can't create business hours. Okay, that's right. We can skip that. Then we can go to call flow after hours. Just cancel this. All right, so let's say we set all that up and we saved it. We go to call flow after hours, which is the next option here. And that's where we can set the business hours of this call auto attendant. So by default, it's 24/7, but you can come into here, clear all the hours and set the specific business hours of your business. And in here, you might just do 9 to 5, perhaps. And you just have to go in here and set that for every day. Okay, and if you had split times of the day, you can add split times as well. You can see there's an option to add the new time, to add different times of the day if required. And then down here, you would then have these call flows for after hours. So what happens when a call comes in outside of these business hours? What does Teams do with it? We can automatically play a different audio message. So record a new message saying, sorry, we're closed right now, but if you leave a message, we'll get back to you next business day. Something like that, upload that, and then route the call. We can then redirect it again to a voicemail. All right, so you might have a separate voicemail for this out of hours group. Again, you will see that voicemail is an Office 365 group or Microsoft 365 group. So assuming you've created that, then you could just search for that in here and choose it as an option. One thing that you can do, you can turn on transcription of voicemails so that when you do get that email, you'll have in the body of the email what the caller is saying. You will also get the attachment as an audio message in the email as well. And then otherwise you can redirect it to someone as well. So if you have someone taking after hours calls, perhaps, we could choose them. Or if it's another phone service, perhaps that's called via a direct number, then we can choose that external phone number and then just type in the phone number, whatever it is. And then Teams will then forward the calls to that phone number when it's out of hours. All right, so I'm just going to reset that to default and then go to next. So we set that up after hours. And then we've got call flows during holidays. And so what we can do here is we can actually set different holidays and manage the calls that come in during those holidays so that they get redirected. This is a little bit of a pain because you've got to actually come in here and you've got to add each holiday for your business manually. So you see when we add one here, we have to actually go into add the holiday, and we would say Christmas, and you can see we've got to add the actual date every year. We've got to add the date, we've got to add the time. This is because obviously not every business is the same. It's up to your business on what holidays are appropriate for you. So you'll have to come in here and add them yourselves. Once those are done, then you would then be able to then set up the call flow during that holiday. So you would then be able to choose that holiday and then manage the call flow. Perhaps play a Christmas message and then redirect the call again to voicemail or to someone else. So I think what you can see, there's heaps of flexibility around managing the calls as they come in to the auto attendants. The auto attendant is usually that first port of call that answers that call, triages the call, then redirects it. You can see it can do a lot, right? So it plays the IVR, but it can manage out of hours, can manage public holidays. And now we're looking at that directory search option where I showed you before. If you have that turned on, then you can actually limit the scope of that search through this option here. So you can include specific people by creating a custom group, a Microsoft 365 group that only those people are in. Then Teams will limit the scope of that search to that group. Otherwise, you can do it the other way where you exclude certain people. So you might just have the executive management that you want to exclude from that directory search. Then you could add them to a group and add it as an exclusion here. All right, so once that's done, then you would just assign that resource account. So again, this is why we created that resource account first. Kind of got to work backwards, create the resource account, then create the call queue, and then create the auto attendant. And then we go add, submit. Now that mainline auto attendant is set up and this number is active, you could actually come in here onto your phone. You could call that now and you would see what that sounds like. So that's basically the gist of what I wanted to cover today. Hopefully what you can see is that it's actually quite easy to set up. The SIP trunks, the assigning of numbers, hosted network have got all that well documented in the knowledge base. It's basically just copy and pasting, replacing a couple of things here and there. And then setting up the auto attendants and call queues and resources accounts are all done through the admin center. So except for assigning the number to the resource account, which is done back in PowerShell. So once you come in here, you can set up a couple of things, play around with some of the options. It's actually really easy to use, really easy to set up, and has a lot of flexibility for being the phone system for businesses. Ourselves, we use this today in our business for triaging calls, especially the auto attendant. We find it's great, for pressing 1 for sales, 2 for support, routing the call outside of business hours, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so that's about it for the demo.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brian. Now, guys, I'm just gonna quickly run through some of the stuff, the initiative that we are doing with MODEX that I mentioned earlier. We do have a couple of questions. I promise we're gonna get to them ASAP ever since we're running out of time. So in collaboration with Brian and the team at MODEX, right, we're gonna offer a range of professional services, and that will include things like once-off Teams configuration, SIP trunk association, per user activation, stuff like that. But especially we have a live end user training or live admin training, that you can then go and offer on sale to your partners. Talk to your hosted network account manager, send us an email. Your account manager will be able to share more information with you, and I'm definitely happy to give you more details. I believe like it's not currently in our price book, but will be in our next release, which should be pretty soon. Now, we also have a range of partner resources that you can use, to get yourself familiarized with direct routing. Things like 14 days free trial, white label marketing content. Meryl is the person to hit up for that. We have a rebuilding platform, not for resale credit, and as you we offer Teams direct routing in a multitude of form, per user, per channel, pay as you go, or unlimited. Again, talk to your account manager. We will be able to help you. More than happy to share more information with you. So now, mindful of the time, we have a few questions. I'm going to read out a few questions. We have a few good ones here. First one is David Watson. Is there a list of function which can be completed within the Teams admin portal versus PowerShell, Brian?
Yeah, there isn't really a list, unfortunately, that kind of compares what can be done in the admin versus PowerShell. Basically, everything that can be done in PowerShell, hosted network have documented in the knowledge base, which is what I showed you today around setting up the voice routes, assigning numbers in particular. Those are the main things that need to be done via PowerShell. Otherwise, everything else is done through the Teams Admin Center.
Awesome. And second question is from Nathan. What 365 licenses are required to implement Teams direct routing?
Yeah, so you need to either have E5, or if you're not on E5, then you need to have the phone system add-on license. So it'll be, if you're using E1 or E3, for example, then you need to have the phone system add-on for each of the users. I think I showed it previously I'll just quickly show you in the screen share.
Yep, I'm just going to stop my screen share so Brian can.
All right, so I showed it previously. If we have a look in here at this user, licenses and apps, it says Microsoft Teams Phone Standard license. So it just needs to be added on to an E1 or E3, or if you have an E5, then you don't need that. Otherwise, if you're a Microsoft 365 business, then you can go to Business Voice as an option as well. But there's a few, this is basically the basic license that you need for Teams.
Yep, and my recommendation will be to talk to whichever distributor that you buy your CSP from. They have a specialized, headcounts to really help you go through all these licensing complexities of Microsoft and their products. Now, next questions from Ray. Can you explain channels in more detail?
Channels. So is that channels in Teams?
Yeah, so I think that's right. If you can probably elaborate your question more just by the Q&A, we'll try to get returned to you, because I think there's a SIP channel, there's channels in Teams. So
okay, yeah.
So I guess we'll go back to that. The next one is from Lilo here. A very long question. So for enabling voice input on auto attendant under the then route the calls and selecting play menu options and the audio file, right? Does the voice input attempt to listen to voice inputs during the audio files and cut it short if it hears invalid voice inputs, or does it wait until the audio file finishes before listening? That's a good one, actually.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I haven't actually tested it, but I think you would actually listen to it as you're playing the message, because it's just like, when you press 1 while the message is still playing, it will actually just take you straight to the selection that you've made. But good question. I actually, haven't tested it myself in terms of making that selection while the voice message is playing.
So it's always nice to have this kind of stuff, right, that you never thought before.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Lilo. We'll try to get back to you if you notice something interesting. Do share with us as well if you're testing it yourself. Just circling back to Ray. So Ray replied channels versus teams versus group, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the way that Teams works, the structure is that there's a team, and then in the team, there's always channels that live under that team. And by default, there's always a general channel. And the channel is basically like a subfolder or a subtopic of that team. For a sales team, it could be monthly reports, or it could be a specific sales team that have a channel underneath the team. So the channels are kind of part of teams. Like, you can't have a team without channels. And so the channels are basically just what gives you context, I guess, to a team. And so that's what you have to assign when you associate a channel with a call queue, is you can't just associate a team to a call queue. You need to actually associate the specific channel that lives under that team. And that's predominantly because as I mentioned before, the call queue actually gets added into the channel as a separate tab, so that you'll actually be able to see the call history for that call queue. You'll be able to see all of the agents that are logged into that call queue through the Teams channel.
Right. Okay.
And then the other stuff around Microsoft 365 groups, so that's kind of like sort of like a distribution group on steroids, where it sort of adds some SharePoint stuff for storing and collaborating on files. It adds sort of like a connector in Outlook for like conversations. So Microsoft 365 groups is something that they added just before they released Teams, I guess, and it was sort of like the precursor to Teams. So not many places use it. I probably wouldn't recommend using them too much, other than for just managing memberships. Think of it as like a distribution list or a security group.
Yep. Okay. Now, next question from Yusuf. Can we use extensions without DID trunks in the system, or does every Teams user need a DID and trunk?
Yeah, every Teams user needs DID. Every Teams user doesn't need a trunk. So the number of trunks, obviously, and then the number of channels means the number of concurrent calls that you can receive or make. And so as long as your utilization, I guess, doesn't exceed that allocation, then you'll be fine. But every user does need a DID assigned to them.
Yep. Okay. Now the next question will be from Niall. Is it possible for a human receptionist to handle incoming calls and transfer them to user or queues, or does it have to be done via the auto attendant? And is there an option to get a live view of queues and active calls from manager?
Okay, so it is possible to have a human receptionist. So basically, you would set up that auto attendant to route the call directly to that person, is what I would do. So you wouldn't have a greeting message. You would just have straight away greeting message, basically. Straight up redirection, yeah, basically to that person. And the main reason for that is so that you don't have to then allocate the mainline number to one person. Then if that person changes, or you want to change people, you can always come back to the auto attendant to change that setting, change the person. And then the mainline number is always associated with that auto attendant. So then as that person takes that call, they're free, they can transfer the call within Teams to anyone within the business.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, another question we have here is there an option to repeat the options? Where would that settings be located? I would assume it'll just allocate a number and then,
So this is actually a funny one. To repeat the options, usually what I do is I would, in the message, press 1 for sales, 2 for support, 3 for so on. I'll, press 9 to hear these options again. And what I would actually do is create a loop. And so I would have that option selection as 9, and then I would redirect that call back to the
previous,
to the auto attendant itself.
Right. Oh, that's one way to do it, I guess. Probably is that the only way to do that from technical standpoint, or?
Yeah, at the moment, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Cool. I think this is the last question we have, guys. I mean, if you still have any other questions, just post it here. Otherwise, we can wrap up after this. But this is from Lilo again. Is there a contact center integration that MODEX or hosted network recommends for Teams direct routing? I guess this is really more for MODEX than for us. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't got any recommendations, but it really depends on what your requirements are around contact center. Yeah, unfortunately, Teams doesn't have anything great around contact center. I think there was a question as well around seeing the call queues and that sort of thing. And Teams, hasn't got a great sort of visibility around contact center management. So you can't really see all of the call queues, how many calls are waiting, what's the time it takes for people to pick up a call, all that sort of stuff isn't available yet. And they're more sort of contact center features. And so, yeah, I can't really recommend a specific contact center integration, unfortunately. But there are a few, options in the market. It would just come down to what kind of your requirements are.
Right. Maybe we'll share some names, Brian. Maybe something for them to check out or research.
Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head. That's why I just need to.
No problem. Yeah, while we'll circle back to that, there's another question from Yusuf here. Can we use extensions without DID or trunks in the system, or does every Teams user need a DID and trunk?
I answered that one already. That one, everyone needs a DID.
Yeah, so every user, I think every functionalities that a call is going to hit first would need a DID.
Yeah, so every call queue, every auto attendant, every user needs a DID.
Awesome. Another question from Lilo here. Are Teams call queue API data available?
Teams call queue API data, I'm not sure. I'll have to check on that one.
Yeah. And again, Lilo and the guys, right? If you have any questions, do make use of your distributor, because Microsoft's pouring a lot of money to the distributors for specialized headcounts that's really sitting there just to answer this kind of question. Any 365 related tendencies, Teams related questions, they do have it. If my recommendation for you guys is, if your current distributor can't help you with this, time to find a new one. So yeah,
that's good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it at the moment. For the call center integration, send me a message. I'll continue to chat with Brian, and if we come up with some names, then we'll send it your ways. And to everyone else, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for attending. As usual, if you have any questions or would like a demo or to discuss this further, reach out to us, reach out to your account managers. We'll definitely be more than happy to chat as always. And Brian, thank you very much for your time as well. It's been great.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon.